going to start the recording. There we go. So, do you want to just start sort of from the beginning and talk me through kind of what's happened and how sort of it's led to the sort of position that you guys are in now?
Well, we've been working with, it's West Mercia Rape and Sexual Abuse Support Centre, and we've been working in Worcester since 1986 and in Herefordshire since 2011. And we run an absolutely brilliant first-class mental health service. We've got a range of services. One is the advocacy service, which is predominantly supporting people through the criminal justice system. And that's funded predominantly by the Police and Crime Commissioner. And then we have the counselling and therapeutic intervention side, which has struggled for funding forever. I mean, I've been working here for 17 years and we've never had it fully funded. We do get some funding from the Ministry of Justice through the Rape Support Fund, but it's just not enough money to meet demand. And we work with women and men and children from the age of 5 years up for anyone who's had any form of rape, sexual violence, sexual abuse or exploitation at any time during their lives. And the therapy service, one of the brilliant things about it is that it's not like you go to your GP and you've got 6 to 8 sessions and you're out, because that doesn't work for sexual violence. It's long-term, week-on-week intensive support and therapy and helping people to recover from what's happened to them. A lot of our clients have been sexually abused as children, and the national stats say that it's 1 in 5 girls, 1 in 8 boys, and roughly 1 in 20 children will be sexually abused before they're 16 years old. So this is a massive problem across the whole country, not just in our area. But what has happened is that demand for service has grown year on year and funding hasn't kept pace with it. So we're in a situation now where we are receiving an additional 60 new referrals on average per month. We've already got 435 people on the waiting list waiting for service, and we just can't keep adding to the waiting list. It's not ethical to take somebody on. If somebody has been raped or abused, they need support immediately. Maybe a couple of months they could wait, but not 18 months, 2 years. It's just got beyond anything that's practical, ethical, sensible, really.
So the funding, you've told me yesterday that you don't get any from local authorities or the local health providers. What kind of are your options at the moment going forward?
Well, we've made the decision to close the waiting list, which I have got to say is probably one of the hardest decisions I have ever had to make, because I know that we are leaving very vulnerable people who will be at risk of self-injury, suicide and healthy coping strategies without support. And knowing that, we've put this decision off time and time again. And over the last few months, over the years, we've been trying to engage with local authorities and health partners and say, this is a brilliant service, you need to fund us, and nothing ever happens. So over the last couple of months, we've been sending out to everybody that refers in saying, this is how long your client is going to wait. Unless you can fund us, that, we're going to have to close the service. And it's just got to the stage where we can't carry on taking these sort of like clean hands referrals where agencies just pass people on to us and say, you're going to go and work with the Rape Crisis Centre. So we've really just had to say enough now. We can't sustain this anymore. I remain hopeful that local authority and health partners will chip in and help us. But what we need is not just a dump of money. We need long-term sustainable funding, because otherwise we will be in this situation year on year, which we have been for the last 17 odd years.
You said there that it's been the hardest decision you've had to make. How does it feel, like sort of having to say no to these women and men and children?
It is, and I can speak on behalf of everybody that works for us, it is absolutely devastating. And knowing that you are potentially putting people at risk and not being able to support them, it's horrific. And it comes down to, it's just plain wrong. I haven't got enough words to say it apart from this is wrong. And if it was your child that was raped, you would want them to get support straight away. If it was your partner, whether that's male, female, however they identify themselves, you would want to have support for them in place. And to be put in a situation where we're saying, you know, enough is enough, we've had to wait. You know, we've got people waiting for 2 years. We've got a child waiting for just under 12 months. And we can't carry on. And the irony, the awful situation about this is that we have got an incredibly skilled workforce of sexual violence therapists and counsellors. They do all sorts of interventions like Gestalt and play therapy and all different things to engage with people on different levels. And we're now having to say we're going to lose some of them because we can't afford to keep them on. So the waiting list is going to grow because we're going to lose staff. Whereas if we just had that sustainable money, we could do so much more. And it's frustrating, it makes you angry, but most of all, it's just heartbreaking, I think is the word.
We knew that the local authorities have a pot of money for domestic abuse and violence sort of support. It's not quite the same, though, is it, for rape and sexual abuse? Do you think there's, you know, a bigger issue here that needs to be looked at, maybe from, you know, a higher level, more legislative government level, that they need to get involved to rectify this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Domestic abuse, there is all sorts of statutory legislation that says, you know, each local authority has to support a domestic abuse service, which is brilliant and fabulous, and I wouldn't knock that in any way, shape or form, although I would add that they are chronically underfunded as well. But sexual violence is an anomaly. There are no key performance indicators, nothing that makes a local authority or a health authority say you have to do this. And because of that, there's nothing to make people fund us, if that makes sense. It's, you know, we're a nice to be had. And there's that, I mean, without the Ministry of Justice and the Rape Support Fund, they have been a lifeline for the counselling service over the years. So I wouldn't want to knock them, apart from the level of funding hasn't increased. But it should be, this is a public health issue. This is a local authority issue. It's an education issue. It's, you know, if between 1 in 5 and 1 in 20 children are going to be sexually abused before they're 16, you've seen all of the information online about everyone's invited and the peer-on-peer abuse. This is a growing issue. The easy accessibility of pornography, which in some cases is really horrific, and there's a lot of rape porn out there as well. Indecent images of children online. So the problem isn't going to get any better. And we've gone through COVID and lockdown, which many people are still working from home. So perpetrators have had unfettered access to children, to partners, and it takes time for somebody to disclose that they've been sexually abused, because they need to make sense of what's happened to them. And often it's an ongoing pattern of behaviour. It's not a one-off incident. You know, the myth in society is that it's a man in a raincoat and he drags you down a dark alleyway. In effect, you are safer in the dark alleyway than many, many people are at home. The vast majority of rapes happen in the home or in the perpetrator's home, generally by somebody that you know. I mean, I think in 17 years, I've worked with 2 or 3 stranger rape cases, and that's it. Otherwise, it's family members, it's associates, it's friends, work colleagues. And it's that misconception, really, of the scale of the issue. And people just don't want to talk about rape and sexual violence because it's nasty. And if you recognise the scale of the people who've been abused, who've been subject to sexual violence, then you have to look at who's doing it. And the underlying thing here is male violence. When you look at perpetrators, the vast majority are men, and that whether that's aimed at women, girls, men or boys, the vast majority of perpetrators are men. And until we tackle that base issue and make, you know, a zero tolerance policy within schools, things aren't really going to change.
You've sort of touched on, you know, victims there, and especially during the pandemic, having been at home potentially with their perpetrators for a number of months now, over a year. You know, with the sort of, you know, you cutting off the waiting list now and not being able to take on any more, you know, what impact is it going to have on them?
On the people on the waiting list?
Well, and people who also need to access the service in general as well.
Everybody on the waiting list, we will ensure that they have a service. It's a reduced service because we've had to cut the service to the bone. I mean, we've been able to support people over a number of years, which is that specialism within the sexual violence sector that you know, if you've been sexually abused when you're 5, the amount of damage that's going to do throughout your lifetime, if you don't get help until you're in your 40s, there's a lot of unpicking and a lot of work to be done there. So we've had to cut the number of sessions that we can offer people, which itself just doesn't sit comfortably. It's not right. So we will be able to support everybody on the waiting list. It's going to take longer than we thought because we're going to be losing counsellors along the way. And for people who need the service and can't access it, I don't know. I mean, our helpline is open at the moment, but that hasn't got any funding either. We work with Rape Crisis England and Wales to deliver live chat, so that's another source of access. But as for actually getting therapy support, I mean, our advocacy service is still working and we will support as many people as we can through that. But I don't know, Isabel, the answer is I don't know. And that's scary, knowing that we're going to be leaving men, women and children without support. It's not good.
So what do you think this says about society's attitudes towards rape and sexual violence? You know, the disparity there between sort of, you know, money and funding for that, and then also money and funding for domestic abuse, which is obviously, you know, so needed and, like you say, chronically underfunded still. But, you know, what is it about our attitude? You say there that it's sort of, people don't want to talk about it, but it's such an issue. You know, where do we go from here?
I think there are many aspects. One, we need to in society to stop this rape culture. And, you know, I don't know if you've looked on the Everyone's Invited website, but the stories and disclosures that people have made on there, and they are young people on there, it's wrong. So there is an awful lot of violence against women and girls and men and boys in society. And it's tackling that central issue that I think is key. One of the main areas would be to look at education. We do deliver in schools and try and tackle sexual harassment. I mean, you walk down the street and you can see sexual harassment happening. If it's in a pub, people are being groped, touched inappropriately, and people, predominantly groups of men, find it funny. And we need to change that and have a more respectful approach and healthier attitudes, I think, towards sex and relationships. Because if you are having sex and you have got consent and everybody's engaged, and isn't that brilliant? That's how it's supposed to be. If you are raping somebody who is unconscious, how is that ever okay? How do you tolerate that? And we were talking recently to a police superintendent, and he was saying about, you know, these girls make themselves vulnerable. They go out and have a couple of drinks, and then you find them, you know, sick and up an alleyway or whatever. He said, well, no wonder things happen. That's not the thing. If you look at society, there are two types of people. And one person would look at that young girl and go, she's in a state, she needs help. And the other person, the other type, would say, oh, there's an opportunity, I can rape somebody. So which sort of person do we want in society? The one that is compassionate and helps, or the one that sees an advantage and causes irreparable damage?
So what are your sort of next steps from now? I know you've briefly mentioned there that you've still got your advocacy service open and things like that. But is there anything that people can do to help the public? Are you lobbying anyone else potentially for funding and things like that?
Well, we didn't take the action until we'd run out of options, really, and this is a last. Where do we go? What do we do? I remain hopeful that people will engage with us and that people will support us, but we're not talking small amounts of money that, perhaps an individual, and obviously unless they're a multimillionaire, could donate. We need in the region of £600,000 to £800,000 to run the counselling service a year, and to work with the people that we have waiting on the waiting list as well. That's going to take a substantial amount of money. So we have, through social media, contacted all of the local city, county councillors, all of the MPs. We've engaged as far as we can with council officers. The Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, the team in there are really supportive, and they've been trying to reach out and make contacts for us. We have a glimmer of hope potentially with some funding from Herefordshire, but what we need is that long-term commitment and waiting and see what happens, really. We continue to fundraise. We've put in, I think it's 7 bids in the last 2 weeks. My staff team are working around the clock. But even when you start looking for pots of funding, there's not many organisations out there that want to fund rape and sexual abuse. And this isn't just us. You were saying before about society. I can name you 7 or 8 rape crisis centres off the top of my head that have got waiting lists similar to ours, some even bigger. And it's just, I think I lose the words, really. It comes down to, if this isn't good enough for you or your partner, why is it good enough for anybody else? And there must be health commissioners and local authority commissioners and in government, because this does need to change. I mean, just put the money in. We make so many savings. It's a brilliant service. If we make early interventions, we can stop and work with all sorts of mental health issues, so that they don't get any worse, so that people don't suffer over years. We can, sexual violence should be a strategic consideration across every organisation, and it's just not. And I think until that changes at central government, it's not going to change at local government either.
Mm. Yeah, it's like you've said, it's heartbreaking, to be honest. And it seems like at the moment there's like you say, there's a couple of glimmers of hope, but I guess it's taking every day as it comes at the moment,
Yep.
and making your way through it as best as possible. But I know you've probably got a fantastic team who are working so hard.
I'm incredibly proud of the team. We have round about 50 staff, the advocacy team, the helpline team, the therapy and counselling team, and it's not just a job. It's about making things better and changing lives. And if you are working with somebody and I don't know, when you've come to the end of a course of therapy sessions and somebody leaves and they don't need to see you anymore, that is absolutely fantastic. Or if they have a breakthrough and they recognise that none of this was their fault, if they can lose some of that shame and self-blame, then that's what makes this work brilliant and rewarding and fabulous. And the fact that we've had to close the waiting list is just, I haven't got the words.
Mm. Well, listen, Jocelyn, I think that's everything I wanted to ask you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add at the end at all you haven't spoken about?
Hopefully we will receive funding, and I hope that if anybody that listens to this or sees this can lobby their local council, local MPs. We need all the help that we can get, and not just in the West Mercia area. I mean, obviously my centre is at the heart, and we've had to take this step but things have got to change, and they're not going to change unless we lobby and make changes.
Put pressure on them. That's what sometimes it's what it takes, really, isn't it? And the louder you speak about it, hopefully the more chances you get heard, really. Listen, I'm just going to stop the recording there.